All right, guys, hello and welcome to another episode of Thinking Out Loud. With International Working Women's Day having been this week, I thought it'd be interesting or, on point to do an episode focusing on women in Palestine, women in Gaza, and some of the issues and absolute horrors that they have been going through, right? So with this episode, we're going to be covering the recent story that's been in the news of IDF soldiers parading around with Palestinian women's underwear, rummaging through their personal belongings, putting them on their tanks, wearing them, doing TikTok, all this stuff. You guys have probably seen some of this, but I have an analysis from a independent journalist through the New Arab, where she kind of talks about why do they have this obsession and sort of the silence and complicity of the Western feminist movement when it comes to this, literal sex crime being perpetuated by the IDF, right? So I thought that would be interesting to discuss. So we'll be jumping into that. It's relatively brief. We'll then be going on to an article, I believe, from Al Jazeera that outlines a UN report that details a series of crimes against humanity against Palestinian women and girls, including extreme deprivation, humiliation, and of course sexual assault. And I thought maybe it'd be interesting to touch on the history of the sex trafficking of Palestinian women and hypersexualization of Palestinian women by Israeli people, right? And then finally, we're going to be touching on another report out of the UN recently from a sexual assault expert, where she apparently went to Israel and then confirmed, big air quotes, confirmed the story that the official Israeli narrative that Hamas perpetuated systemic sexual assault on October 7th. Again, big air quotes, confirmed, as we're going to see as we look into that report. I have an analysis from Electronic Intifada, absolutely indispensable resource when it comes to this particular topic, especially. Nothing was really confirmed. She's actually just laundering the story that has been going on with that, right, despite it's continuously being debunked, even now, by mainstream media outlets, right? So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. And then, along with this, I kind of want to talk about how white liberal feminism has a important role to play in the neo-colonial imperialist order, right? And how this sort of liberal notion of feminism isn't really feminism at all. It's just a sort of liberal, cultural, hegemonic system that helps manufacture consent for the imperial system we live under, right? I'm going to try not to lecture you guys on that too much because, big shocker, I'm not a woman. So maybe y'all should be listening to women on these topics. And, a lot of this stuff is touchy. So I'm not going to dive too deep into that discussion. I'll kind of give you some outlines of those perspectives that you hear from a lot of independent female journalists and obviously experts on this type of subject, right? But anyway, without any more rambling from me, let's go ahead and jump into it here. Check the little parameters we got rolling. All right, so like I said, guys, this first article is from the New Arab. IWD, why are Israeli soldiers obsessed with Gaza? Nadine Asbali asks, why aren't feminists who preach sexual freedom up in arms about Israeli soldiers violating the most intimate parts of Palestinian life? And of course, here are some of these images, guys. That looks like an interesting article. Dune 2 and Hollywood's commodification of Muslimness. Interesting. But yeah, just horrifying stuff. These guys are in here perpetuating a genocide, murdering people. As we'll see in one of the articles, we've heard stories of the IDF executing women just in the street. And this is also happening in the West Bank. But yeah, here you have them parading around. This is just a few examples. I don't know what the fuck, guys. War porn. In the half-light of a Gaza neighborhood obliterated by Israeli bombardment, Israeli soldiers rummaged through a boot full of underwear that has been looted from the houses they've pillaged and destroyed. I swear, one of them says to the camera, Palestinian women are the sluttiest in the world. Yeah. The underwear of Palestinian women has become a symbol of how Israel's ethnic cleansing has permeated even the innermost sanctity of private domestic life in Gaza. I mean, this stuff, guys, with the parading around the underwear and all that, this is like something you'd see in a fucking Holocaust movie, dude. When they're kicking them out of their home and like shipping them to the ghetto, or you know, trailing them off from the ghetto to Auschwitz, and they're going, you know, when they go through all the luggage and shit, and then you could see a fucking Nazi, you know, dangling these underwear and making a joke out of it with his fucking fascist friends, right? I mean, like, look at these pictures. You can literally just change the uniform. It's disturbing as all hell. You know, and then, of course, guys, just a little addendum here. This is, you know, we talked in a previous episode about when they were parading around those men in their underwear and making them turn in weapons. And then obviously we had a discussion about how later it came out that 95% of those people were just regular everyday people and they had no connection to Hamas. And those who were, quote unquote, Hamas were from the political wing. They weren't even like armed insurgents or anything like that. But we talked about how, and we read some source material about how that was an attempt to emasculate and dehumanize Palestinian men, right? Like, you're stripping away their masculinity, you're emasculating them in front of the world. You know, that's why they did this kind of thing, right? And very similarly, we're seeing the same thing with Palestinian women. We're seeing them hyper fetishized. You know, it's quite clearly the trope of the conquering army coming in and pillaging and raping the women of that society. And look, we have their underwear now. I mean, this is what that is. There's no other way to cut it. It's not them being silly. It's not. It's fucking rape porn. It's war conquest rape porn is what it is, right? This disturbing obsession is glaring evidence that Israel's so-called war is about so much more than self-defense or eradicating Hamas. It is about dehumanizing an entire people in order to legitimize their brutal eradication. The obsession of Israeli soldiers with Palestinian women's underwear is a reminder that Muslim women's bodies have always been metaphorically and physically intertwined with Western colonial pursuits. So this, of course, is that Orientalism. This is the Orientalism, and you see it everywhere, particularly, obviously, in the porn industry, where the hyper-commodification of a woman's body is at its apex, right? This is why you see incel dweebs. It's Orientalism. They hyper-fetishize the erotic Asian woman, or... You know, you'll see there's porn. I mean, Mia Khalifa is a great example of this, in particular when it comes to Muslim or Arab women. And she's just such an amazing person because she took the kind of, I guess, stardom that she got from being a adult film actress, and then she's really channeled it into a political element, speaking up on behalf, in particular, of Palestinian, and I believe she's either Palestinian or Lebanese, right? So kind of from that Levant region. But she's really taken that and spoken out on, the porn industry, and then obviously the, Israeli apartheid and genocide of Palestinian people, right? But Mia Khalifa, with the beginning of her career as an adult film actress, is a really prominent example of the hyper-fetishization of Muslim women where, people in the... It's one, that erotic Orientalism, like how it is done with Asian women, but it's also, there's this association between the humbleness and modesty of Muslim women with the, hijab and all that kind of stuff, and the sort of high respect that comes with that sort of culture of modesty, right? It's just very different perspective on what empowers women as compared to the West. But anyway, it's taking that modesty and raping and pillaging it, right? And that's sort of a lot of why Mia Khalifa became huge. It was, at the height of the war on terror, it was Western men, white supremacist colonialist men, colonizers, settlers, hyper fetishizing, being able to force themselves essentially on Muslim women with their modesty and respect for tradition and all that, right? That's what's also happening here in Gaza right now. Sorry for the long addendum there, but I thought that was important context. This International Women's Day, as we celebrate Rishi Sunak doing the dishes and the kind of pink-tinted feminism found in Barbie, the silence of feminists has never been more deafening. Israel, we are told, is a beacon of liberalism and progressiveness in the Middle East, a shining light of Western values in the dark Arab Muslim world. LGBTQ plus haven, the one true democracy in the region, the only country for miles with genuine equal rights between men and women, apparently. And of course, guys, this is a trope you all know. Having lived in the Imperial Core yourselves for the last 2 decades of the war on terror and the massive colonial project perpetuated by the U.S. and Western Europe in Central Asia and the Middle East, right? Or West Asia, rather. This is in all of your minds unless you've taken the time to unlearn it. And it took, admittedly myself, time to unlearn these things. You picture Islam as being fundamentally anti-women, anti-gay. You picture it as being dark and superstitious. Oh, and look how cultish these Muslims are. They pray 5 times a day when the priest tells them to. And these things are all just such a bastardization of what Islam is about what Arab culture is about. And, it's important to remember that you can disagree with a religion or a culture's perspectives, like, say, towards this or that, be it gay people, be it traditional roles for women. You can disagree with it being from where you are, but at the end of the day, it's not your superior moral judgment or perspective that is going to, quote unquote, liberate groups of people from those, theocratic regimes or this or that. Our Western feminist liberal ideas about these things are, as we can talk about later, always used to manufacture our consent for neocolonialism, for imperialism, for empire building in the region. I mean, we saw it with Iran, obviously, and stuff like that. But we'll get into more of that later. Let's keep reading here. Of course, it reveals what those of us routinely oppressed by the West already know. It cements the very truth that Israel as a state is built upon. That Palestinian women, Arab women, Muslim women aren't women at all. They are objects to be criminalized and fetishized in equal measure, eradicated and sexualized all at once. And this is obviously kind of attached to the discussion that we were having earlier, right? Look at some of the captions shared with these images, like, quote unquote, kinky jihad, rather than serving as a stark reminder of their humanity, as it would be with any other group. The presence of underwear in Gaza homes becomes an excuse to dehumanize the people who live there. Yeah, and it talks about that in this as well. If this were images of Ukrainian women's underwear, or I don't know, like whatever, insert whatever U.S. vassal state that's doing the bidding of the U.S. empire and therefore through the media has been hyped up as this democracy or blah, 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 whatever it is, you would see, pictures of women's underwear or any of these things as a reminder of the human or kitchen, whatever it is, right? As a reminder of these are human beings. But no, with this, you're seeing this as, fucking war rape porn, right? The rudimentary and the domestic are warped by the Israeli army into a weapon of war. Hang on, I'm going to zoom in here on this, guys. A signal that if you are Palestinian, even the contents of your underwear drawer are not sacred. Everything is collateral damage to Israel and its allies. But what we should be able to expect better from is a mainstream feminist movement that buckled over in solidarity for the women of Iran when they fought for the right to remove their hijabs, the women in America whose right to an abortion was eroded, or heralded Ukrainian women for fighting back against Russian occupation. Of course, this is the double standard here, isn't it, guys? And at the end of the day, it comes to the divide. that we have the international divide of humanity, the international division of humanity. There's the golden billion, as it's called, that resides in North America and the historic colonial projects of Western Europe and Western Europe itself, and then, Japan and South Korea, just to be a little inclusive with the Asians, right? That's the golden billion on the planet. The other 7 billion human beings on the planet are the jungle versus the garden, right? They are the unwashed masses, dark, barbaric, superstitious, brutal, right? And when it comes to women in any of these other regions that are part of the golden billion, they get the respect and admiration and encouragement of Western feminism. But when they are not, they are, at best washed away, and at worst seen as a conduit for the oppressive regimes and theocracies and ways. They have Stockholm syndrome, right? This is what we see with that, right? Going on here, guys, says, but for Palestine, no. There has been no mass feminine outrage at the pillaging of Palestinian women's underwear by soldiers. I will say that they're right. Yes, there hasn't been, and particularly in the mainstream media or through establishment politicians and these things, there hasn't been. But there has been widespread outrage against these things from the actual mass of working people. I mean, we see it every day all around the world, people protesting these things. And these instances in particular add fuel to that militant fire, right? Going on here says, unlike the feminist celebrities who cut off an inch of their split ends in solidarity with the women of Iran or donated their designer wardrobes to help the displaced women of Ukraine, there has been no feminist campaign for the women of Gaza. There may have been anger at Barbie getting snubbed at the Oscars, but when the women of Palestine are having cesareans without anesthetic, giving birth in bombed-out hospitals with no electricity, burying the children they spent a decade trying to conceive, ripping up tents for sanitary towels, mainstream feminism looks the other way, or chooses to peddle unsubstantiated claims about systemic sexual violence by Hamas. Mainstream feminism's silence is because mainstream feminism is in fact white Western feminism. It cares about equal pay and getting women's football on par with men's and electing a female president, but it has no interest in dismantling white supremacism or battling imperialism when it requires these realities for its own survival. Okay, so I kind of want to try to go on to an addendum here to explain a few things, and I'll try to keep it brief because I'm already kind of running on time. This white Western feminism, and again, another addendum to this, guys, big shocker, I'm not a woman. And I would encourage you, there are plenty of women writers and women content creators that are going to have a lot better nuance and analysis of this kind of thing than I could ever. Even if I spent my whole life studying this shit and I'm some douchebag professor teaching women's history. And I mean, you can imagine, my God, there's people like that. But, they're going to have better perspective on this, but I can give, some quick perspectives. White Western feminism, in my opinion, at its core, has never actually been about the real liberation of women, the real achieving of equality of women. I think a lot of the people in it, it's not that their heart isn't in the right place and they don't truly believe in these values. But at its core, it's always been about fitting women, white Western women, into existing patriarchal structures, existing structures of patriarchal domination, instead of overthrowing those systems and creating new systems upon which women are actually equal and have the systemic and policy values codified that allow them, despite their differences or despite preconceived cultural notions, allows them to exist as fully equal citizens in a society, right? Instead of that, in white Western liberal feminism, we get the insistence that in order for men and women to be equal, women have to be equal within the patriarchal structure. It doesn't do anything to tear it down. It doesn't do anything to tear down the political system. Like it said here, it doesn't do anything to tear down imperialism or colonialism, which, of course, relegates the women of the global south to fifth-class citizenry where they are sex objects to be sex trafficked, all these things, and they're, casualties in colonial war. It doesn't do anything to tear that down. Instead, it just insists that women can be CEOs, women can be politicians in a patriarchal political system. It can be women in positions of power as long as they embody masculine urges and desires for wealth and power and consumption, right? And you can look at this your own way, right? But this is kind of my take on it in what I've read from feminist authors and stuff. And, feminism, liberty for women, for any group, looks different for everybody. And so I'm not saying that, in that process of Western feminism, there isn't inherently good things. It's not that women being equal value within the patriarchal system isn't better than not, but it doesn't go far enough to actually liberate women, right? To guarantee the things that the special things that they need in order to be as functional within a society and deemed equal within a society as men, right? Like in the Soviet Union, we saw a lot of efforts to make that happen. And that live on to today. Like in Russia and the former Soviet states, they have much higher levels of women working in the sciences and bodily autonomy and things like that. But along with Western feminism, we saw women resisting the sort of modesty culture that's inherent in patriarchal Christianity, right? And that is a positive, right? With the suffragette movement and things like that, you saw women showing more skin. I mean, these are not bad things. I'm not saying that. And for some, liberation for women means different things for different women, so with that, we saw the liberation of the female form, right? And that is a positive. But unfortunately, what I think along the way we saw is because there was no actual sustained effort to dismantle patriarchal systems as a whole, we saw that move towards female bodily liberation, get overtaken by patriarchal capitalism, consumerism, where, they saw that trend towards women wanting to be in their own bodies and women's nudity and don't sexualize it. But they took that and they warped it into this hyper-sexualization. And it's been going on for so long now that I think it's really hard to separate where the actual freedom of women through their being able to have their body without being sexualized and the hypersexualization has, starts and ends. Like, where do we separate it? And I think a lot of women themselves don't even know, because women, like any group that are dominated, and we talked about how this has happened with black men and black people, say, in the police force and stuff, with Frantz Fanon's Black Skin, White Masks, how people subconsciously, psychologically take on the belief systems of the oppressor, right? Anyway, I'm totally rambling here, but, white Western feminism just doesn't go far enough in actually achieving liberation for women. And again, one more addendum. This is a man telling you all this. Go find those women authors. Go find those women content creators that are they're gonna know. I don't know. I'm just repeating what I've heard and which made sense to me. Anyway, let's go on here, guys. Sorry for the rant there. Western feminism sees Muslim women as its collateral damage, its perpetual victims. This is key. The recipient of its superior liberal feminism and never an active participant in it. No matter how intersectional it may claim to have become, Western feminism is still concerned with forcing its liberal ideals upon us. So key point there, guys. Again, going back to what I was saying as I ramble, thinking out loud, right? What feminism means for those of us in the imperial core is different and is going to have a different outcome and way of being than Muslim women or Asian women. There's nothing wrong as a feminist with embracing traditional female roles. That can be empowering for some women. We see that in Islam. We also saw that like in the American Indian movement, right? With like Cherokee women and Lakota women. They were deeply militantly feminist, but they just didn't share the Western liberal values of what feminism is, and they felt like it was being crammed down their throat because they felt empowered in their traditional roles. And that's not me dog whistling for trad wife shit. I don't mean that, but like, it means different things for different people, and it's important to remember that. And if we're going to build actual feminist movements, one, we need to listen to women and have them lead the way, but those women also need to come not just from white middle class. It needs to come from black and brown people and shit like that, right? Anyway, but that's why the issue of Gazan women's underwear has unsettled me so much. Doesn't white progressive liberal feminism fight for women's right to obtain sexual freedom and body positivity? Doesn't it demand it? After all, that's why it cares about women being forced to cover up and never the other way around. That's always been interesting to me about, like, you even saw in France, like during the height of the war on terror, they forced that Arab woman to take off her hijab. Like, what the fuck? You're missing the goddamn point. There's nothing inherently feminist about having your tits and pussy out, right? For some women, that's powerful as fuck. Goddamn, go get it, girl. Walk around nude if you're a woman. I don't give a I kind of lean towards the Greco-Roman thing. Like, bring back women would have their tits out when they walked around with, like, the cool veiled shit. Hell yeah, But for other women, that is not... Here's the thing. Women's empowerment, women's liberation means women get to decide what they do with their bodies. That's it. Cover up, don't cover up, walk around nude. I don't give a fuck. It's their choice. Figure it out. It's pretty simple. Shouldn't it be up in arms at the sight of men using the props of women's bodily autonomy to humiliate, shame, and oppress them? No, because they don't care, because those aren't white suburban women. Anyway, guys, that's what I have for that article there. Obviously an op-ed. I thought it was pretty poignant and made some really good points. And I apologize, we're already running so far that I just really enjoyed that article and some important conversation to have there. Moving on here, guys, I'm going to try to get this going at more of a clip, but we have this article here from Al Jazeera. Says, UN experts warn of Israeli violations against Palestinian women and girls. So with this, guys, we're going to get into some of the abuses that we know have been perpetuated by the IDF. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this here, guys. Says the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, said in a statement on Monday that it had received information that Palestinian women and girls have reportedly been arbitrarily executed in Gaza, often together with family members, including their children. The UN experts said they were shocked by reports of the deliberate targeting and extrajudicial killing of Palestinian women and children in places where they sought refuge or while fleeing. Some of them were reportedly holding white pieces of cloth when they were killed by the Israeli army or affiliated forces. So again, guys, just absolutely egregious, horrifying crimes against humanity. Like the stuff that you read about in a war novel, just horror. The UN experts expressed alarm over the arbitrary detention of hundreds of Palestinian women and girls, including human rights defenders, journalists, and humanitarian workers in Gaza and the West Bank. Many have reportedly been subjected to inhuman treatment, denied menstrual pads, food, and medicine, and also suffering from severe beatings. On at least one occasion, Palestinian women detained in Gaza were allegedly kept in a cage in the rain and cold without food. We are particularly distressed by reports that Palestinian women and girls in detention have also been subjected to multiple forms of sexual assault, such as being stripped naked and searched by male IDF officers. At least 2 female Palestinian detainees were reportedly raped, while others were reportedly threatened with rape and sexual violence. And we did some coverage of testimony of this in past episodes. But guys, like at the height of this is what we know and what we have for tests. There are thousands of women locked up. We cannot imagine the scale of this. What is going to come out once this is all said and done? The stories. There will be novels, books, movie, in-depth study of this that is going to go down as one of the worst crimes against women in the last fucking 100 years. It's horrifying. They noted that photos of female detainees in degrading circumstances were also reportedly taken by the Israeli army and uploaded online. Of course, this is something like we saw with the Israeli army posting pictures of women's underwear and stuff. Just the calloused, inhuman nature of the Israeli people. I mean, they have gone full long down this Nazi-esque life, and they're posting it to TikTok and stuff, like influencers. An unknown number of Palestinian women and children, including girls, have reportedly gone missing after contact with the Israeli army in Gaza. There are disturbing reports of at least one female infant forcibly transferred by the Israeli army into Israel, and of children being separated from their parents whose whereabouts remain unknown. So with this, I want to touch on people going missing. War is the most hard on women and girls because they're going through everything that the men are going through, plus they're being raped and abused in ways that can't even be... I can't. And then they're also being sex trafficked into sex slavery. And there's a long history of this, of Israeli people coming in, abducting Palestinian women, and then selling them into sex trafficking because they're not human to them, right? And we know that's what's happening right now, too. How many of these women that are missing, you know, probably a good half, are under the rubble dead, right? So, for instance, that number of 35,000 dead, it's way more than that because they're not counting people under the rubble. But another half, how many of those women and girls are being sold into sex trafficking? Horrifying. But really, that's all I have for that, guys. Just a quick little synopsis of some of the things they're going under. You know, some of the stuff we talked in the past. I want to move on to this next article, though. Just going along with, the title of this video today. No Women's Day for Palestinian women. So why we just did this report from the UN about how Israeli women and girls are being abused on a systemic level. The IDF posting videos of themselves with underwear, doing these things to women. Then we have this from the Electronic Intifada. UN report launders Israel's fraudulent mass rape propaganda. We recently had a UN official of some kind come into Israel to try to substantiate the claims. Now, with this, we have heard endlessly Israel talk about on October 7th, there's mass systemic violence and weaponization of rape by Hamas on Israeli women as a weapon of war. We have seen this debunked 100 ways from fucking Sunday from all kinds of independent media outlets. And then now, most recently, from The Intercept as well, we've had a big scandal of the New York Times trying to cover its ass for publishing this horrendous story without any real evidence. And now we see, as that's happening and that narrative is crumbling all around them, we see this UN official come in and confirm all of it. But as we're going to see, she doesn't confirm shit. She just parrots the same fucking narrative. And, it's just pretty telling that, like we were just reading about, we get almost no news media coverage in the West of the absolute crimes against humanity, horrifying sex crimes being perpetuated on Palestinian women, but then endlessly not letting it die despite it's being debunked. We have this story of Israeli women being raped by Hamas, and there's no evidence of it, just beating us in the brain with it, right? And of course, this is because that serves the kind of white colonial rape propaganda. The filthy savages rape our white women. That's what that story is. That's what it is. It's just rehashed for a modern audience. That does the opposite happening of the savage white people coming in and raping brown women. Nobody in the West gives a fuck about that. The Western white liberal women in their little fucking country clubs and shit don't give a fuck about that because those aren't women to them, right? Anyway, rambling here, but let's go on. I did highlight a lot of this because it's very prescient and just tears apart this argument. Says, just as Israel's long-running propaganda campaign alleging a strategy of mass rape of Palestinians on September-October was unraveling at high speed, a United Nations official stepped in this week to try to stick it back together. The Israeli government is grateful to the official, Pramila Patten, who released a high-profile report on alleged sexual violence at a press conference in New York on Tuesday. It came after a 2-week visit to Israel between January and February by Patton and her team. This is key timing for Israel. Since December, the most important proponent of the propaganda narrative has been the New York Times. But as Electronic Intifada has been reporting, the Times is embroiled in a growing scandal over the veracity of its reporting the issue. A now infamous article screams without words how Hamas weaponized sexual violence on October 7th has been completely debunked by a small group of independent journalists from the Electronic Intifada, the Gray Zone, and Mondoweiss. And despite several of its writers giving credence to the false claims of mass rape, The Intercept has done additional further reporting describing. We saw all these independent journalists. It's how it is being on the left. You call shit out, people act like you're fucking crazy. Then months or weeks or months or years later, it comes out and people still act like you're crazy because nobody reads the goddamn redaction. The damage is already done, right? But we've seen it become more mainstream narrative-wise that this was all bullshit as The Intercept, a more mainstream news outlet, covered it, obviously, right? In their latest piece on Monday, The Intercept's Jeremy Scahill and Ryan Grimm identified and talked to family members related to 2 of the 3 alleged victims of sexual violence. Singled out in the Times piece, the family insisted it's not true. They were not sexually abused. The family of the 3rd supposed rape victim, Gal Abdush, had already disowned the Times article back in January when it first came out. You remember this. She was like, what the fuck? She gave testimony to the Times. They completely warped what she said. They didn't tell her what it was going to be about. They literally used her grief and mourning as a tool of a weapon of war, and it's incredibly disgusting. The Times is facing a growing internal rebellion among its staff over the article. An episode of The Daily, the widely heard podcast produced by the newspaper, was canceled in January after failing a fact check. Times whistleblowers, as well as staff of Arab and Muslim heritage, are facing a witch hunt by the paper's management, who are desperate to stem the leaks about internal turmoil. So this is just crazy about living in the imperial core and the sort of internalized racism and white supremacy. So it started coming out that this story that they published and its testimonies and the people who wrote it were all bullshit. Because one of the people that was involved in writing it was liking a bunch of tweets and repeating a bunch of shit about exterminate all, like really graphic Nazi-esque shit towards Palestinians. That came out. But it's, you're living in the imperial core when the people who out the truth, the whistleblowers, are hunted like in the Salem witch trials, but the people pushing lies, the lies that have been exposed, are not. That tells you everything you need to know about media in the West. Make no fucking mistake. Pramila Patton's report then seems almost as if it was time to save the Times and by extension the Israeli government. But contrary to media spin, the Patton report further exposes the claims of systemic sexual violence as fraud. Patton is not the unbiased UN official seeking to combat sexual violence during conflict that she claims to be. Israeli newspaper Yediot Aharonoth reported last month that during her visit to Israeli settlements near the Gaza boundary, in each meeting she attended, Patton consistently expressed her solidarity, empathy, and sympathy towards Israel. Patton's visit was not a formal UN investigation, and the resulting report presents no new evidence. It is conspicuously vague on specifics and admits that being based almost entirely on Israeli government and military sources. So again, guys, not an official formal UN investigation. I guarantee there was some backroom dealings. They took this person who's an official in the UN, right? Sorry, I'm getting a little amped up here, guys. And they said, go and do this whole thing and save our fucking asses, right? And there was some gold dinares, some gold drachmas exchanged along the way. A key conclusion buried in the report concedes that the UN team, quote unquote here, guys, was unable to establish the prevalence of sexual violence and concludes that the overall magnitude, scope, and specific attribution of these violations would require a fully fledged investigation. As Patton report itself notes, Israel has consistently refused to cooperate with independent UN investigators. Crucially, Patton and her team were unable to locate a single victim and did not speak to any alleged survivors of sexual violence or rape, despite making a public appeal for such survivors to come forward and speak confidentially and with assurances of safety, because they don't exist. It did not happen. It didn't happen. And the more I go on with this, and the more I think about October 7th, that lasted about 6 to 7 hours, in terms of Hamas and other militants going with the action, the military action take, I don't think any of them raped anybody. You know, you hear some people talking about, well, there probably some happened, but it wasn't on purpose. I don't even think that fucking happened. Now, when the wall was destroyed and people, any kind of Tom, Dick, or Harry got out of Gaza, maybe some of that happened from them. But in terms of the militants engaged in this particular military action, take hostages and break out of Gaza, I don't think any of them did any sexual violence, especially when we look at how the testimonies of Israeli hostages have said that they were treated with the utmost humanity. Because one of the things of people fighting colonial war, one of the strategies often taken is, you know, the colonial power, the imperial power wants to demonize the colonial subjects as savages, as monsters, as barely human. So they have all this rape propaganda, horror propaganda, heads on stakes, whatever. You know this shit, right? You know this shit. This Thomas Cook bullshit. Cannibals, whatever. So people resisting colonialism, they understand that that's a narrative being pushed on them about them. So they go out of their ways a lot of times to do the complete opposite and behave in some of the most humanitarian ways possible in a war zone or in a hostage situation, right? It also asserts that there is reasonable grounds to believe that sexual violence against Israeli prisoners in Palestinian custody may be ongoing. Again, the report does not explain what these reasonable grounds are, nor does it explain what this convincing information is or where it comes from. Patton's report does say her team spoke to returned hostages, the Israeli prisoners released by Palestinian armed groups since 7th of October, but crucially does not say that any of them claimed to have been sexually assaulted. That's your classic thing of doublespeak, of blurring the lines, right? The claim that Israeli captives are being raped does serve a key Israeli narrative about the need to continue the genocidal war in Gaza. So just more lies, and it's just disturbing. Honestly, guys, this goes on a lot more, but we're going way over time here, so I'm going to kind of cut this short because it's just more of the same, more of the debunking. I think you're getting enough of a taste from it, from what we can see here. Pretty cynical cover-up to try to save the ass of the New York Times and the Israeli administration by weaponizing the UN. Anyway, guys, yeah, that's all I have for you. I just wanted to do a little bit of a different direction with this, and more of a focus on women's issues with the genocide going on in Gaza, with it being International Working Women's Day. I'm sure this won't be coming out on that day, Friday the March 8th. But anyway, I hope you appreciated it. Happy International Working Women's Day to all, especially those women comrades that are in this fight. You know who you are. Solidarity forever. And remember, guys, everyone, women hold up half the sky. It's love and solidarity forever. So, again, that's all I have for you. If you want to support my independent media work, you can do so on Patreon at patreon.com/entitledmillennials. You can support me there for $1 a month. Greatly appreciated it. Special thank you to Green Ethos, who recently became, I believe, a $10 tier member. Really appreciate that, man, or woman. I don't know. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to everyone else who's been supporting the show financially. You can also support my independent media work by giving one-time donations through PayPal at paypal.me/entitledmillennials. Thank you so much. And don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, help that algorithm. Thank you all so much, guys. And I look forward to, talking with you all again very soon. Bye-bye for now.